Now's the time to start buying mining equipment. But don't fret, you don't have to rush to do this because you still have some more time ahead of you before the prices of mining hardware start to go back up. Let's get into it. So earlier this week, I saw a post from Hivon referencing the Cointelegraph article here discussing the price of Bitcoin and, of course, the miners for Bitcoin in particular. Right now, the post states that half-priced Bitcoin is what we are looking at and a tenth of the price of ASIC miners. Historically, ASIC and Bitcoin prices have moved hand in hand. However, recently companies have been over leveraging their Bitcoin as collateral and ended up flooding the market. And here's what I did want to discuss. As you guys have seen over the bull run, a lot of miners were taking out loans on their ASIC hardware. And what ended up happening is that the ASIC hardware is tightly correlated to the price of Bitcoin, meaning that when the price of Bitcoin came back down to reasonable levels, i.e. the cost to mint a Bitcoin, the price of the miners also went down, which means that they had over leveraged themselves, meaning essentially they owed more on the miners than the miners were worth, and slowly started going bankrupt, etc., putting a bunch of used miners on the market. And while this may look bad initially, this is great news for anyone who has followed along on this channel for a while, because it means you can now get into the Bitcoin mining game if you are ready to plunge in. Let's go ahead and dive deeper into this. The original article, like I said, came from Cointelegraph, but what's more interesting is the source data, which comes from the hash rate index from Luxor. Actually, they did a great job here. They've only been tracking since November of 2018. This is the full chart of ASIC mining hardware. This top line is going to be the hardware that is most efficient, anything between 25 to 38 joules per terahash. The second line here is the 38 to 68 joules per terahash. And then the bottom line is going to be anything above 68 joules per terahash. To relate this to particular miners, of course, to give you an idea, the S19 would come in at 39 joules per terahash. And then scrolling up from there, if you got to the S19 Pros, those are going to be around the 30 joules per terahash. And then the most efficient right now is the S19 XP, which is 21 joules per terahash. But I wouldn't fret too much about this in general, because what is really interesting about the previous cycles that we have witnessed multiple times is the older hardware becomes in demand as well once the euphoria sets in on Bitcoin during its halving cycle. And if you take a look right now, there is a pretty good opportunity coming into play. And we'll kind of talk about this chart in general. In 2018, around November, of course, we started to see the decline of pricing in the previous cycle for the ASIC mining hardware. But what's really interesting is that it was still correlated with Bitcoin price. What we're starting to see on this tail end here is that the Bitcoin price is not correlated to the price of the ASIC miners, where we're starting to see the ASIC miners come down. This is because previously we didn't have this institutional money and large capital coming into the game during a bear market, purchasing a bunch of ASIC miners and then leveraging against them, which ended up being a very poor strategy. Like I've said before, don't invest more than you can lose, and also don't be taking out credit during a bull run to go ahead and purchase miners. In fact, most of the time I would recommend never taking out any sort of credit, but I am breaking that rule this time around due to the fact that what we are seeing is record low ASIC miner prices, and especially as it correlates to the price of Bitcoin. Of course, it will all come down to the cost to mint for everybody and each individual, and the more competitive energy cost you have will play a huge factor here, and that'll be something that you need to look into for yourself. But if you're looking at purely just bulking up on some mining hardware and even sitting on it until the bull run comes around, you could find yourself in a very lucrative position in just flipping miners. And that is because, once again, as you can see, even the S9s, as you recall, which I've covered in my crypto mining e-course, were extremely cheap during the last bear market, and they started to skyrocket and actually come up to where you actually ended up having a 300% increase in the price of like an S9 and very old piece of mining hardware. And if you just held on to those and were putting them up on eBay, you could have a pretty good business model going. So this is something to take into account, but it is a very long game. Where are we right now in this chart, right? We're probably looking at this November of 2019 timeframe is where we're at right now. So we have really an entire year here to start accumulating mining hardware if the halving cycle repeats itself. Now, there are some things that are making this halving cycle different. One is, like I stated, that over leverage of these large miners on their hardware, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the price is going to go ahead and adjust for that as well. It'll be really interesting to see how it plays out. For me personally, I am starting to invest in Bitcoin ASIC miners because it's something that I've always wanted to get into, but I felt like it was very difficult previously. It's becoming easier. We'll talk about GPUs here as well, but this is really where I'm seeing the opportunity. And that's because, as you can see, there is a huge opportunity in a very specific range of miners here at the end. So let's go ahead and zoom in on this chart here. This is the 3-month. Let's get the 6th month, or maybe even just the year. So as you can see here, the 38 to 68 joules per terahash range has actually just had a recent huge dive in price compared to the rest. It had a little bit of a pump up, and then now it's kind of gone even further down while the rest remain consistent. I would presume that the S9s are dead in this cycle. I wouldn't go ahead and get anything above 68 joules per terahash unless you're purely just solo mining off of like some sort of solar setup for fun. That's a completely different strategy here, but I'm really seeing the opportunity in this 38 to 68 joules per terahash range for the mining equipment, because I think we do have one more cycle left in them. And if you scroll down here, of course, you can see, for example, that the S19 is still technically profitable. M20 here, not profitable. And it really will also, once again, depend on your specific price for, of course, your power. But even if you aren't, like I said, you can sit on these and wait for the zoom out. Remember, zoom out again and wait another year and be able to capitalize on it. So this is really what I've been looking at in particular. And the other thing that comes into play, though, is we are going to have even more potential. So this is the caveat to all of this, and that is that the Antminer S21 is supposed to be revealed this year, and it will come in at 20 joules per terahash. But that wouldn't be dissimilar from what happened previously, because as you can see here, right around November of 2019 is when we started getting those S19s and those S19 Pros, etc. So it would actually line up and be on the exact same release cycle that we saw previously. These aren't even a bad decision to purchase and wait for the S21s. Of course, always wait for second batches to make sure there's no issues with those particular units. But the other thing that I really like about these older units between the 38 and 68 joule per terahash range is that they are pretty well tested. There's a ton of repair options for them in general, with a lot of third-party repair technicians hitting the market here recently, which we've covered here previously, as well as all of the courses that you can take. They're very well known. You can get them repaired a lot easier. There's a lot of replacement hash boards for very, very cheap. So if you're buying units that are broken, it's easier to repair them, which means you could even have another year here to purchase broken units, replace hash boards, learn to repair them, and get them ready to go. But this is the build-up time. This is the time. We got a year here to go ahead and build up as much inventory of mining hardware as you possibly can. And that is kind of my reasoning behind all of this. Some of the units that I've stayed away from too, for example, would be like the S19 XP series, personally, just because when they move to that aluminum board, cooling board, and kind of change things around, they are less reliable. So even though they do have a better efficiency, their repair options are more expensive. Getting parts for them are more expensive, and they don't run as long and as efficient, or well, more efficiently, yes, but not as reliable. So that's kind of why I stay away from them. In addition to that, one of the big game changers that came around this time is the plethora of third-party firmware, third-party control boards, as well as even just on the standard control boards and firmware from Antminer, the low power modes. And these low power modes are bringing the efficiency up. So while you may come in here and look at an S19 and say, oh, well, that efficiency is awful, once you have that low power mode in place, the efficiency of these actually go up. So that's another thing that you can take into account here that isn't really recorded in this process. And I'm going to be covering this a little bit more because I am getting more units to test. Now, the S19 specifications are even a little bit better. You know, if you get the top of the line S19s that are pumping out that 95 terahash a second, and that power efficiency comes in at 34 joules per terahash. And why is the S19 so interesting, especially right now? Well, as you saw on that index, we had that big dip down, and there are pallets of group buys coming in. And for example, if you go get in contact with Coastal Crypto Mining right now, they have a group buy going on for S19 90 terahashes for $550 per unit. Now, they are an affiliate, but they are not a sponsor of this channel, and this wasn't sponsored by them. So this is a genuine just suggestion for you to look into if you're looking into trying to pick up some of these miners. In fact, I will be picking up about 10 of these here this week. I will be participating in the group buy because at this point, I think that it's a pretty solid choice. If you're looking for other miners, of course, you can always check out bt-miners.com. I'll leave the link down in the description below. They have a bunch of options. You can also go to Coastal Crypto, use promo code SOAT for a 2% discount on any of these units. Everything's coming down. I am noticing that though, while the prices are coming down, even on the retail, you can get better prices outside of retail through used sources, etc. So keep that in mind. Now, on the GPU side of things, unfortunately, we haven't seen a huge price drop in something like the CMP 170HXs yet. Primarily, I think because of the demand of AI as well, we aren't going to see as much of an opportunity from the mining side of things for cryptocurrency on the GPU end. And this is due to a lot of different factors. One, we have both of the companies, primary companies, AMD and NVIDIA, really kind of getting in there and manipulating the flow of GPUs to the consumer market to keep the prices inflated. And secondary to that, like I stated earlier, the AI movement is coming in so heavy in full force that the demand for GPUs is actually higher than the Bitcoin ASICs. We could talk about altcoin ASICs. However, I'm really not a big fan of altcoin ASICs because it's harder to look at the data, right? They have higher risk, which does mean potentially higher reward. But if you have all of these numbers for the Bitcoin side of things and you're able to track them, it does give you a little bit better of a way to build out a good business plan here for the future. And I do not think that we are going to see many more dips in the price of ASICs if we're correlating to previous behavior. Remember, history doesn't always repeat, but it does rhyme. So we could see a couple, I think, you know, maybe one more dip in the April range, it looks like, somewhere around there. And that would be coming in right around the time of the halving. We could see that dip, and that would be because you could see miners start to FOMO out. And this has happened previously, because when the halving initially happens, the profitability of all these miners look really terrible because the price hasn't adjusted yet. Remember, it takes a little bit after the halving for the price to start to adjust to cost to mint. And so you may have the absolute best opportunity in April to the May range for pricing of these units, but the buy time has started based on historical data for Bitcoin mining ASICs. And that's really what I'm getting excited about here. I've set some goals up for myself. For example, I'm trying to get to 600 amps before the halving, at least 600 amps by the end of next year, 2024, in just Bitcoin miners. I want to get to 600 amps on the GPU side of things. However, I'm still kind of waiting to see how this plays out. A 4090 isn't enticing to purchase. A 4070 isn't. If we can get some of those older mining specific cards for cheaper prices, I think I have seen some things that are interesting on the AMD side of things, as far as like the BC 160s. Those are kind of interesting. The 6600s and below, if you can pick those up, but keep in mind, if they've been mined on, it will be pretty difficult to keep them up and running. I think the 5700 XTs, in my humble opinion, this will be the last cycle. So this will be my planned cycle to dump, I think, a majority of my 5700s and move into something newer as well. So this will be how I price out and get everything done. But this is all the insights that I have at this time. So I want to give a huge shout out to Hive for posting this. Make sure you guys go follow them. You can also use my referral link down below if you're looking for something to manage not only your GPUs, but your ASICs as well. And I even utilize them when I'm utilizing Rainbow Miner for remote management. So they've been very beneficial there. And with their scheduling options through the bear market, it's been very beneficial to be able to turn these things off during the day in the hot summer and then power them back up. That's been some of my other strategies that I've been doing. So this has kind of been a talking head video. I know I'm dumping a lot of information on you guys. So if you have any specific questions surrounding all this, let me know in the comment section below. I'll also leave a link for the information on the group buy from Coastal Crypto and the information as far as BT miners, as well as Coastal Crypto referral links. So if you want to support the channel, you can support it there. If you'd like to support me directly, you can support me over at sonofatech.locals.com and become a supporter there. You can get a free month of supporter status as well with the purchase of my crypto mining e-course at sonofatech.com, where I cover the specific buying cycles like we kind of talked about today, but in more depth and more structure, so you can have actual tools to utilize. I also include a bunch of different business plans and material that you can look at that hopefully will give you a little bit of an edge when getting into this. But as for me and this mining farm, we are ready to start building. Let me know if you're going to join down in the comment section below. I remember this time very, very clearly during the last bear run, and I do know that there will not be many of you, but I'll look forward to seeing how it plays out for the ones that do participate coming up in 2025. I'll see you next Tuesday.